Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is defense attorney Julia Jayne. Julia, thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Friday was a historic day. It was an unprecedented day. President-elect Donald Trump was officially sentenced to an unconditional discharge in the hush money criminal case in New York. So first, can you walk us through the punishment here? Can you define what exactly is an unconditional discharge?
I have to say it's very unusual. I've never experienced it, as I think probably many defense attorneys or anyone in the criminal justice system hasn't quite seen that, because typically, especially a felony conviction, typically comes with some sort of punishment. It doesn't have to be custody time, it doesn't have to be jail or prison, but there's usually at least a period of probation, perhaps a fine, community service. In fact, it's rare for a criminal case to conclude without some sort of fine. In California, actually, every conclusion has to end with a restitution fine that goes to the courts. But in Trump's case, it was, as noted, an unconditional discharge, meaning there are no penalties, there is no fine, no probation, no jail time, no community service, no kind of supervision. And so the case is essentially over.
So when do you see an unconditional discharge? When would that be an appropriate punishment?
Well, of course, this is such a unique situation, as Judge Marchand noted, that this is a person who will take office in just about a week or so. So that in and of itself makes it very unique. But otherwise, it's really hard to imagine a scenario. I would say there are perhaps limited instances where somebody has been on, for example, supervision for a very long time prior to the disposition of the case, where they might just be sentenced to essentially time served or something like that. It typically comes with probation, but I actually once had a case where somebody was on home confinement for a very long period of time, which counted towards the credit of the case. And essentially it concluded with the clock being run out. So there was nothing left to impose. That's maybe a situation where you'd see no probation, no prison term, because it's already concluded. But even that's going to have some fines. Criminal cases come with fines and restitution.
I would love if, through your legal lens here, if you could parse through the judge's words here and read between the lines, what did he mean? He called the unconditional discharge the, quote, only lawful sentence, and said that the decision shields, quote, the office of the President of the United States and not the occupant of that office. What exactly does he mean?
If I had to read between the lines, I would say he is saying, this is our elected president. He needs to do his job. Does it make sense to impose community service or some kind of supervision in this instance when he has the most important job in the nation? And he's saying, no, it's not going, it would interfere with this great responsibility that he has to lead the nation. And so I think that's what it is. He's saying that it's the office. It's not this person that I'm particularly crediting with doing something amazing and doesn't deserve a penalty. It's that he has to take office, and any sort of condition, such as probation, where sometimes you might have to report to a probation officer or comply with certain conditions, report your income. All of that, he's saying, is unnecessary and actually might interfere with him doing this very important job. And the American people might agree with that. Do we need him checking into a probation officer? I mean, he has people all around him every single day watching what he's doing. But what is important that should be remembered is that felony conviction stands. He is a felon. There are certain rights that are restricted. For example, he cannot own a firearm. Under federal law, he is a felon. So unless he either I know he's going to be, his lawyers will be appealing, unless that conviction is overturned, or unless he's pardoned by, or pardoned by the governor. It's not a federal case, so he can't pardon himself. Unless that conviction somehow goes away, he is otherwise a felon.
And he made history as the first former or sitting president to be a convicted felon. And that still stands. So no other punishment, but he's still a convicted felon. So what message, if any, what point was the judge making, if any, by this?
So you raise a good point. You say convicted felon. It was today that he became a convicted felon. Yes, he was convicted, But a conviction becomes final when a judgment is issued, and a judgment is issued at sentencing. I believe that's why the judge didn't just want to indefinitely postpone sentencing, because that would make the conviction not final. So as of today, he is a convicted felon, which is a very unique situation that you noted we have never encountered before. So he sitting today, he's a convicted felon. The message sent, well, some people might say, so what? It doesn't really affect his everyday life, but it is historic. It is, nobody wants to be labeled a convicted felon. Nobody wants to have a felony on their record. Well, given his age and his, he's going to be in office potentially for 4 years if his health is fine. And so after that, is it going to affect his everyday life? Probably not. But for many people, that felony conviction is life altering.
I know that the judge said that this decision protects the office, not necessarily Trump himself. So from that lens, and I know we can't change history here, so I'm asking a hypothetical, but let's say Donald Trump lost the election in November. Do you think we would see a different outcome today?
I think we would see a slightly different outcome. Yes, there were 34 felony convictions. But it was a unique prosecution, I would say. And some have argued perhaps it should have we're on the level of misdemeanors. He has no criminal history in terms of not pending cases, but actual prior convictions. And so even if he had lost the election, I think there would be probation, fines as you would see, or restitution as you would see in a typical case. But I'm not sure he was ever facing actual custody time. Yes, we've heard this carries a maximum of 4 years in prison. Every case carries maximums. That doesn't mean that anybody gets a maximum penalty in a particular case. So given that he is, even if he had lost the election, a notable figure, and the judge might have said community service, something else, but it certainly wouldn't, I don't believe it would have been a complete unconditional discharge. That is very unique. And given the judge's words that this has more to do with the office than the person.
This saga took place in New York, and today doesn't mark the end, because Donald Trump did indicate that he is going to appeal this conviction. So what does that look like? And will the landscape be different here? Will it be more favorable to him, since he will be the president in just less than 2 weeks?
Well, he will be appealing the conviction. As I understand it, it has to start with in New York State, because it's a state conviction. So that would proceed as, I don't want to say like any other appeal, because it is the president who is the person appealing. But if it ever reaches the Supreme Court, that will be unique. As we've seen, they've already taken up made decisions fairly quickly, in addition to allowing the sentencing to proceed. But the appeals process itself, I think, typically takes a very long time, and it will proceed through the New York appellate courts, and we'll see what happens with that. They're a little bit more insulated, as was the district attorney, than the Supreme Court, obviously.
So then, from your legal perspective, what are you watching out for next that we should keep our eye out for?
Well, we are already hearing Trump's backlash on this sentence, so people are paying attention to that. But otherwise, as far as this particular case goes, really it's the appellate process. The case is over. So there's nothing more to do with Judge Marchand. He is finished with the case, and that's part of his reasoning too, was there needed to be closure on this. So if anybody's going to follow along to see what happens, what do the appeals look like? Is it just on the basis of immunity, or are there other attacks in terms of how the trial process took place? I expect there would be, and that might present some new and interesting legal challenges.
Well, Julia, I appreciate your insight and your expertise here. Thank you so much for joining me. And as more legal issues crop up, I hope you come back on and break them down with me.
I hope so as well. Thank you very much.